welcome to the Expedient and Kraft Technology Group webinar. The content today that we'll be covering is ransomware plus disaster recovery as a service. Our two speakers today are Don Baham, with the president of Kraft Technology Group, and Aj Kuftic, Expedient's principal technologist. If you will, during the webinar, we'll have questions that you can post in the Q&A panel of the screen, and we'll answer those questions when the demo ends. And if you're entering questions, you're also entering an opportunity to win one of two prizes. Kraft Technology Group is giving away a $150 Amazon gift card. Thank you, Don. And Expedient is giving away a Sonos smart speaker as well. This webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be available to you when it's over. And with that said, I will turn it over to Don.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you everybody for being here. Excuse me. I'm going to try to advance the slide here. There we go. All right, so a little bit about Kraft Technology Group for those that don't know about us that are on the call. We were founded in '92, and we came out of, and still are part of, the Kraft CPAs family of companies. And so Kraft CPAs started in Nashville in about late 1950s, 1958, I believe. Headquartered still here in Nashville. We are a managed IT provider and a managed security service provider. We are independently audited every year by the MSP Cloud Verify program, part of MSP Alliance. And we also go through our own HIPAA verification program as well, since we service quite a few healthcare organizations. Our core values and what we live by: integrity, responsiveness, respect, and commitment. Those are the principles that our team lives by and how we deliver our services. So we are grateful to be part of this webinar and a partner with Expedient on this service. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to AJ.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aj Kuftic. I'm principal technologist with Expedient. For those of you who are new to Expedient, we were founded in 2001. We started as a co-location company and moved out to managed services and cloud. We have cloud locations in US East, Central, and West. Our West region is in Phoenix and just opened up at the end of last year. We also have international cloud deployments on customer sites in Australia, Germany, and Canada. So if our cloud locations don't work for you, we can certainly bring that cloud to you. One of our central locations is in Memphis. So we're right here, right in the heart, right in Tennessee. Not the heart, the western side of Tennessee, but nonetheless in Tennessee. We're recognized by Gartner for DR as a service for the last 3 years in a row. We've been a VMware cloud provider since 2007. We have almost 40,000 virtual machines running on our platform. So we've been running at scale for a very, very long time. And also we're a Zerto Platinum partner, and you'll hear a lot more about that as we go forward. But if we're talking about DR as a service, we have to talk about disasters. And what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Well, at the basics, we have things like power outages, right? Power line goes down, branch hits a line, your data center's offline. And even though that's not necessarily the more interesting versions of disasters, it's still something that can affect your data center. And maybe your things don't go down because you have a UPS or you have generators, but you as the administrator or the organization have to protect the IT assets you have. So that means bringing fuel to the data center and making sure the generators keep running, making sure that you don't lose power from there going into the data center. But the more common one is human error. And I'm sure everybody here has a story about a man with a backhoe. Right? Somebody tore up a line, somebody was digging where they weren't supposed to and they hit a line, or that line wasn't marked, something happened. Mine is actually the opposite. It's not a man with a backhoe, it's a man with a dump truck, where the bed was left open and he clipped an overhead line. So even if your lines are above head, that does not mean that they're far from danger. So for us as IT, we have to worry about all of these sorts of things. Are these in our control? Not entirely. So we have to consider all of those sorts of disasters and how we recover from them. but I think everybody here in the Tennessee area, and especially in Nashville, knows about spring storms and specifically the tornado that hit back in March. And Don, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's very real for everybody here in Middle Tennessee and other parts of tornado country, but it was relatively fresh for us. In early March, this came through and did some devastation in the area. Our building in Metro Center was without power for a week. We thankfully didn't sustain damage, but I know a lot of other businesses were not as lucky. And east of town, there was a lot of damage as well. So this is something that's certainly top of mind as we think about how we prepare our business continuity for this area.
And so I always like to refer to natural disasters as not being terribly common, but in certain areas of the country like Tennessee, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we don't get hit with natural disasters pretty much ever, right? So for me, telling the story of, we can talk about snowstorms and ice storms, but in terms of Tennessee and certain other parts of the country, natural disasters are more common than not. But I think there's one more that's even more common than that, and those are malicious attacks, and specifically ransomware. And from everybody talks about ransomware. They've heard WannaCry. They've heard a number of these other pieces of software hitting personal PCs, but it can get bigger than that, right? City of Atlanta 2 years ago, in March of 2018, got hit with ransomware. They were asked for $51,000 in dollar to Bitcoin. They wanted it all in Bitcoin, but dollar to Bitcoin transaction, $51,000 in ransom. The city said, no, we're not paying that ransom. And right now they're estimating about $9.5 million to recover. That is a huge uplift in terms of ransom to recovery. City of Baltimore, a little over a year ago right now, got hit with a different piece of ransomware. It's $76,000. Their recovery is estimated at $18 million. And the interesting part to both of these is that their IT staffs warned the city that we are neglecting our security. We're neglecting what we do, and we need funding to fix those. The city did not pay those, and thus there were ransomware attacks. And finally, and I think Don's going to get into this one a little bit later, is Lake City, Florida. They agreed to pay the ransom because they did not have the staff. They did not have the budget to try and pay $18 million or $10 million to recover. They paid the ransom because it was cheaper than fixing it. And this is what really gets predicated upon in the market of, hey, it's cheaper to just pay the ransom and make them go away than it is to actually recover from it. And so what we want to talk about is how we help you recover from that. But I think Don's going to dive a little bit deeper into the ransomware portion of this.
Yeah, thank you, AJ. So just to do a little background for folks that may not be as familiar with the topic of ransomware, I provided a definition here from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, part of DHS. Excuse me. Basically, ransomware, any malicious software that is trying to deny access for some demand and payment, right? And there's varying levels, degrees of ransomware types, but that's a pretty broad definition that I think encompasses what we're talking about here in this instance. And one of the reports that I like to look at is the Verizon Data Breach Report, and the 2020 report just came out fairly recently. And of course, ransomware is on there again. Verizon sorts of puts a caveat around ransomware. Is they don't necessarily categorize it as a breach because it may not always be a breach of data. Some types of ransomware just hold the data hostage and don't actually exfiltrate the data out of the network. So they categorize it as an incident, but still it continues to make the report. And one quote from that report that I think we all need to pay attention to is that, according to the authors of the Verizon Data Breach Report, it's a big problem that just continues to get bigger year over year. And so we don't see a slowdown in this because it's effective. And by the data that they review every year, they're seeing evidence of that. A couple of the areas that Verizon sees an uptick, or at least a large percentage of happening in the industry around the different breaches that they review: healthcare, public administration. And we kind of talked about that a little bit and we'll get into that more in a little bit, around different cities that are being attacked, different municipalities. In fact, I think it was the Texas Department of Transportation just last week was hit with ransomware. So it's continuing to happen. So public administration is an area that they're seeing a lot of activity. And then also in comparison to the previous year, the education sector is getting hit pretty hard with ransomware as well. Some of the ransomware variants that you'll see out there that they get some headlines, you'll start to even see some of these in mainstream publications, even if you're not a nerd like AJ and I who look at this stuff every day. But you'll start to see some of these names even in the mainstream media. SamSam is the one that hit City of Atlanta. Soden hit a managed service provider, Synoptech, out of California. That was a big splash. They had a lot of client networks that were affected. Talking about some of the cities, Ryuk or Ryuk, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but New Orleans, city of Durham in North Carolina, and Lake City, Florida, which we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Some of the older ones, and I say older meaning a couple of years ago, Petya, NotPetya. If you don't know the story about NotPetya out of the Ukraine and some potential Russian ties and what happened to Maersk and FedEx, it's an interesting story. Go look it up on wired.com if you got some free time. But it's a story of some ransomware that got out that did more than the authors expected it to. Let's just put it that way. And then WannaCry, AJ mentioned that earlier. That was it was fairly common a few years ago, and it hit so many U.S. hospitals and other healthcare organizations around the country. And ransomware as a service is now becoming more popular. So you have organizations that on the dark web that are starting to offer their ransomware services to other bad actors that don't have the time or knowledge to create the ransomware themselves. They just sort of rent it out. And so we're starting to see an uptick in basically novice bad actors just grabbing some ransomware service off the shelf and starting to attack organizations. So we're starting to see more of that activity as well.
And Don, one of the, you mentioned Wired and WannaCry. There's actually an article that just came out, I think this week, of the story of the guy who stopped WannaCry in his past. It's actually really, really interesting. I highly recommend reading that to kind of get some insight into how that world actually works. It's super interesting.
Like it. I'll have to check that out. Awesome. All right. Okay. So a couple of statistics I want to just point out. So this is looking at the last 3 years of the FBI's Internet Crime Report. So 2017 to 2019. We don't have the next year's report out just quite yet. But what this looks like what this is tracking is estimated annual losses or reported losses. I should clarify. These are reported losses to the FBI. So a couple caveats about some of this data, even though we see a continued trend, and I think we will still see a continued trend around ransomware and other types of losses, is that obviously not all losses are reported to the FBI. They have an IC3 website and database where they collect this information and they encourage private sector to report these losses, but clearly not everybody's going to report it to the FBI. So this is reporting on what information they received, but it also does not take into account lost business, time, anything that they have companies have had to pay out to third-party forensics teams. This is actual hard dollar loss as part of a ransomware attack. So as we'll talk about in one of the stories we're going to get into, the losses can mount up quite quickly and eclipse anything that is coming out of the FBI report. Let's see. So this is, we've seen an uptick in how long it takes to recover. And that's really what goes to the heart of why we're having this webinar today, showing you a better way, a faster way to recover your operations if you're hit by ransomware. Can you imagine your business being down for over 2 weeks, right? I mean, that's got to be catastrophic. And in the story we'll talk about, we'll get into that in a little bit. But on average, according to Coveware, we've got over 16 days of downtime related to ransomware, and we've got a better solution for you. So let's talk about that. That story we mentioned a couple times in Lake City, and some of you may be familiar with this. And who is that individual that is on the slide? That is Brian Hawkins. And Brian Hawkins is, or was, the former IT director for the city of, or Lake City, Florida. And Lake City, Florida, unfortunately has made a $1 million mistake, at least $1 million mistake at this point. And that dollar figure, I think, will continue to go north as we talk about some of the details of the story. But it's not a large business. It's not a large city. So as you think about this story and you think about applying it to other larger enterprises, that $1 million price tag will continue to multiply. So, I don't know Brian personally, but fortunately for us, a lot of the information has been made public, and so we can use that as a learning tool to make sure that we don't replicate some of these mistakes in our businesses or the clients that we help. So like I said, he's the former IT director for a small city, but he had services and servers, applications that required 24/7 uptime. Back in 2017, Brian recognized, and AJ kind of alluded to it, there's IT departments inside these cities and other organizations. They're identifying these problems and trying to bring them to the attention of the decision makers and get the budget necessary to put in the right tools and right services. So Brian recognized a gap in the way that the city was doing disaster recovery. And he made a recommendation for a full cloud recovery solution that would cover their entire infrastructure. And unfortunately for the city, and unfortunately for Brian, he was denied that budget. And so they had to continue operating the way that they were for the most part. I believe they were able to move one application to the cloud that did give them some resiliency, but the remainder of their infrastructure had local backup only. Okay. And that's important when we talk about ransomware. Had a local backup only, no cloud backup, and no disaster recovery solution, essentially. So fast forward to 2019. So a couple years later, maybe a year and a half later, employees at the clerk's office, at the water plant, and the airport, so 3 separate areas of the city, all clicked on an email, and it supposedly was from one of their trusted contacts, and it had an invoice or something attached to it, said that you have an invoice ready. And it was personalized. It looked like it was from one of their trusted contacts. They clicked on it, and as you could imagine, the rest is history. Ransomware starts infecting the network, and it brings the network to its knees. It was as they uncovered some of the information from this attack. Turns out it was obviously a spear phishing attack, and it had a Ryuk triple threat ransomware attached to it, and that's what ultimately brought their network down. Their on-premise backups were disabled either prior to or at some point after the phishing email was successful. They were able to infiltrate the on-premise backup, disable that, and then execute the encryption. So there really was no way for the city to go back to those backups and have something useful to restore from. And so the lesson of the moral of the story here is, the city paid the ransom, equivalent of almost $500,000, and it still took weeks for a full recovery. So even if you do pay the ransom and you choose to kind of roll the dice, it may still be weeks before you can fully recover. And so far, this incident has cost the city at least $1 million in recovery efforts, the ransom itself, and now Brian is bringing suit for not listening to his recommendations, and ultimately he was terminated. So again, those costs continue to rise, but we believe we've got a good solution for you that can help a business avoid a costly mistake like this. And I'm going to let AJ kind of get into that solution and talk about scenarios now.
Sure. So when we talk about this, when we're talking about disaster recovery, we kind of have to think about how hard could it be. right? We're spending a lot of time, and you talked about how their backups were disabled, right? They had no ability to recover. So we have to think about how we handle disaster recovery and what a proper disaster recovery solution looks like. But it's not easy to go through that, right? When we sat down, this was myself and John White, our Chief Innovation Officer, we sat down and kind of thought through all of the questions you would want to ask around building a proper disaster recovery solution, and how you would build that and what you would have to think about to look at a disaster recovery platform. So what's the cost of downtime? And obviously here in the case of Lake City, cost of downtime for 2 weeks and getting all their stuff back was $500,000. So there's your cost of downtime. And it was certainly more as that grew, right? The ability for them to recover, and how do they actually get back up and running? And then how do they prevent this from happening in the future? Like, all of those costs go together. But just in terms of thinking about maybe the tornadoes in Tennessee, or even a quicker or a smaller impact, what's the cost of that downtime? And then the question is, where do you go? Does Lake City have a second site? Does your business have a second site or a third site to be able to go to in the event of an attack or some sort of disaster, or man with a backhoe? And what hardware do you need? So when we look at our virtual machine platforms, that's easy, right? Here's some ESX hosts in my one data center. Here's ESX hosts in another data center, no big deal. But if I add in things like a mainframe, or AIX, or HPUX, or PBX systems, or physical firewalls, all of those additional pieces of hardware, how do I make sure that I have, in essence, a second copy of those? And then how much time can we actually allocate to doing this, right? You don't get more time. You don't get, oh, hey, we have a 40-hour work week. Magically, you have 40 hours, but we're going to take 10 hours of your work away. Just no problem. Don't worry about it. No, you still have to do all of that work. Plus, now you have to build a disaster recovery platform. Oh, wait, are you going to build it? Who's going to build it? Are you going to pay an integrator to come in and do it? Are you going to pay for a service to do that? How do you actually start to build this platform, and how do you make sure that you're allocating your time and your dollars wisely? And then as you go forward, who supports it, right? So think about your VMware platform. I'm just going to keep it fairly simple here. If I upgrade my VMware system to 6.7 in production, I need to make sure that I can run those VMs on my potentially 6.5 disaster recovery platform. Oh, wait, now I have to patch my disaster recovery platform too. That's additional maintenance. That's additional work to maintain that platform. How does the networking work, right? I think everybody here has a pretty good idea of, well, I will have all my things on this storage array, and I'm going to replicate them to this other storage array. And here's my compute, and here's my compute, and everything's running, right? Sorry, the internet exists. How do I make sure that my things can get to the internet, that they can talk in between those systems? My app server can talk to my database server. How do I build all of that networking in? And then who tests it, right? I can click the button and I can bring all the VMs up. Great. But are my applications actually up, or are the servers just up? Do the applications fail to come up because a service failed to start, because a dependency wasn't picked up? How do I do those things? And then how do I validate that that test was successful? I need to make sure that when that application comes up, that my users are happy, that my acceptance is done. So how do I validate that my tests were successful? How do I make sure that all this happens? That's just off the top of our heads, let alone actually diving into what it really takes to build a DR platform. So what are my options? First option is to build it myself. And this is probably what you'll end up with, right? You'll build something that's pretty good, and then we got to cut a corner here or there. Maybe we got to put an indoor door from a house on the back of our truck because, well, this is all we had. I know a lot of people will like to do things like, I'll take this existing stuff that's in my production environment and we'll move that to DR, and then I'll bring up new gear in production and everything will be great. And it works, right? You can replicate your stuff, you can bring things up, but the business is going to expect performance to be generally the same. And if you're using 4-year-old hardware, can I maintain that hardware? Can I get firmware patches for that hardware? Can I get drive and hardware replacements for it? How do I make sure that that hardware continues to be supportable as I go forward, or I just have a DR plan on paper and very less in real life? The other option is a hyperscale, right? That's like a flying car. I can certainly do that, and it's actually really cool and probably the future at some point, right? But there's a big learning curve. I have to learn how to fly a plane, right? I have to learn all of the pieces that go along with it. And while it's still a car at a certain level, I can't just take off with it. I can't just go and use that. And finally, you have DR as a service. And this is very much like the lease on a very fancy pickup truck. Because what you can do is say, every 2 years, I want new hardware. And what we do as a managed services provider is we provide that hardware out to our customers. And when we upgrade our hardware, you get the benefits of it. You get all the benefits of enterprise spend without the enterprise price. So how do we do that? How do we deliver this as a service? We have an awesome delivery team. So shout out to our entire delivery team. If you're watching, big fans of your work. What they do is they sit down with our customer base and they say, how do you want your applications to be recovered? And we help you build those run books. We help you make sure that everything comes up correctly, because we're incentivized to do so, because you don't pay until you have a successful test. And that's a very, very important thing for us. We want to make sure you're successful. We want you to go back to your boss and say, here is our DR run book. And inside of this DR run book are all of our protection groups. And here's how we bring it back up. And we know it works. So we want you to go home with that. We also have the ability to do testing in an unlimited fashion. I've been involved in some very fun DR strategies and that sort of thing, where we had a number of hours per year we were allowed to test. Here you have full control of the test button and full control of the failover button. When it's go time for you, you go press them. You don't have to call anybody. You can. Let's say you're not near a computer and you get the alert that all of your things are down. You can call our operations center and they'll do the failover for you. But if you are available and you can do it, you can press it at any time. And also we have 11 data centers. It says 10 there. I need to update that. But we have 11 data centers that you can choose from. You decide what data centers you want to go between, right? You want to pick our Memphis data center and maybe Indianapolis, or Memphis and Pittsburgh, or even Boston. If you really want to get, some huge geographic distance between your applications and your prod and DR sites, you can do that. But one of the key things that we offer is our network failover. Everybody talks about compute and storage. Nobody ever really wants to talk about the network. And so what we're capable of doing is failing over our firewalls, your IP ranges, your VPN tunnels, and your egress points. So you have a full network failover to go with it. So your customers, your end users, don't have to change their endpoints. They don't have to change what website they go to. They just go get to their applications. They see a minor outage because things went down, right? You had a disaster. But you're able to bring them back online quickly, and they don't notice that anything is actually different. They think there was just a server outage. They don't realize all the work that just went into that.
I think that's huge, AJ, that network failover. I mean, that is an area that I think is cumbersome for most organizations, and the fact that it's built in and part of Expedient solution is fantastic. So I really looking forward to you showing the demo there where you can see how that works.
Right. So let's take a look at how this works conceptually, and then we'll get into the actual demo and we'll actually kick the tires on it. Right. So on the left side here, we have our primary site. We have a private gateway and a public internet IP. On the other side, we have our secondary site, and that can be any of our data centers here. So we replicate the virtual servers over. We have all of our orchestration, so we can go through and build out our application runbooks, or even group of application runbooks, or even full site runbook. So you can get very, very granular with how you want to do a failover. So all of that orchestration goes into the delivery process of how we get you into our push button DR system. So our public internet IP is being advertised out to the core and out to the internet through BGP. And let's say we're having a bad day, right? Our private IPs fail over, our virtual machines fail over, our public IP fails over. That gets re-advertised out through BGP, and now my secondary site is my primary site. All of my remote users, all of my remote site VPN access, none of them have to change anything. They just reconnect. And so they go in, they hit refresh, they go, oh, this website's down. Refresh again, website's back up. They don't have to change anything. There's no endpoint changes that you have to make. You don't have to make a DNS change and wait for it to propagate through the internet for that to happen. It's just automatically there. So slides are cool. Let's actually dive into the demo here, and we will pull that up. Let's change slides here first before we do that, so it's not too busy. There we go. So in here, this is our Expedient Enterprise Cloud Platform, right? This is what you look at every day when you're managing your VMs on our platform. We also offer our on-prem private cloud with DR as a service, so you can we run the cloud inside of your data center and you replicate back to one of our data centers. So we offer that in 2 different phases. So if I go into my ACM data center here, I see my VMworld server 1 and 2, So these are our servers, and they are running a website. So if I go to this website, it's a simple WordPress site, looks very pretty, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the Expedient Enterprise Cloud, and we're going to go over to the Zerto self-service. So all of this is being powered by Zerto. And in here, we have a number of VPGs that are already pre-configured. So I'm not going to go through the configuration of a VPG. We help you with that. But if we take a look at this VPG, I can open this up, and I can see that I have my two VMs in here. They're protected, VMworld Server 1, VMworld Server 2. And I can look at my SLA, so I can see that I have an 8-second RPO right now. So if I were to go to my latest checkpoint, I'm going to lose 8 seconds worth of data. That's pretty quick. I know a lot of places, they'll do a 15-minute snapshot or a 4-hour snapshot or an hour snapshot. We're down in the seconds. So we have near real-time RPOs. So if I go back to my VPG list, I'm going to fail over two VPGs here. I'm going to fail over this one. This is our main, this is what has the servers in it. And this one has our network functionality in it. And we're going to fail both of those over. And they're going to fail over simultaneously. So there, we're verifying that we have it. And I'm going to open up our checkpoints. And we can go back in time, and we can see all of our checkpoints that can go back into the past. So as Don mentioned, when ransomware hits, you have what, 2 weeks to recover? Something like that, Don? 16 days, I believe, was the statistic you used there.
Yep.
Imagine you had a time machine, right? The ability to go back in and click on a timestamp that says, hey, at April 29th at 9:35, we had a ransomware hit. That's when we noticed that all the ransomware stuff hit. Let's go back to 9:34 and be able to recover at that point. Now, you're going to lose data between now and then, but all of that data has been encrypted, so it's not really a loss at that point, right? We want to get our systems back up and running. But in this instance, I'm going to pick the latest because I haven't had a ransomware attack. And I'm going to pick the latest here as well, just make sure that we're good to go. I'm going to change my commit policy to none. We'll talk about commit and rollback here in a second as we roll through. And because we're doing a demo here and this isn't a real life site failure, we're going to force a shutdown on the VMs to make sure that everything shuts down cleanly. So when we fail everything over, everything comes over and comes right back up. So we'll hit next. We'll hit start failover and go. And so now we're actually kicking off this failover. We're actually doing a failover between our ACM data center in Pittsburgh and our 701 data center in Indianapolis. And if we go up here, we're going to go take a look at our data center groups. Now, you pick your locations, and then we group them together in your tenant so you can see both data centers that you're in, or even multiple data centers that you're in. And we can look at our network topology here. We can see that we have two data centers, and the egress right now is going out of our ACM data center. And since we're failing over from ACM to 701, we're going to actually kick off that swap. So I'm going to now send all of my traffic out of the other data center. 1 click, 2 clicks, done. That's it. Now all of my traffic is going out of a completely separate data center. This used to be a lot of work in the networking world. We've made it very, very simple. If I go back to our Zerto environment, we can see that everything should be done. Sure is. So now what we're at is the commit or rollback stage. So I have the ability to go in and pick whether or not this is actually working. And so what I want to do is I want to go into my data centers, and I want to go into my 701 data center and see that my servers are up, they're powered on, so at least I know that they're up and powered on. And just before we do that, let's just make sure that I can refresh, and it's refreshed already. I can scroll the page. So I've already done the failover. Nope, still going to the same website, still going to demo.virtualpotholes.com. I can fail that over very, very easily. So now that that's done, I'm going to commit these. And what that does is it changes the journaling. So now going forward, the journaling is coming out of my Indianapolis data center. So now, even if all of those journals were encrypted on the Pittsburgh side, I'm starting with fresh journals on the Indianapolis side. So I'm now moving away from the encrypted data that is in that data center. And so what this is doing is this is doing the commit. So it's removing that. And if you see those Delta sync volumes, what that's doing is it's turning the replication around and sending it back to Pittsburgh. So my workloads don't lose protection. So all of that is done and built into the VPG. And, you know, for the sake of this demo, let's do it again. Right? We can fail it back now too. So this is one of the other challenges, especially if you go to a hyperscale platform, where if you fail over and you go to that platform, coming back out is very difficult. You have to reconvert the machine back. It's not an EC2 instance anymore. It's not an Azure Compute instance. It's now your VMware platform. Our platform is VMware on both sides, so you don't have to do any sort of conversions. Your applications on-prem are the same as in our data centers. So if I go to next, let's just verify that we're on the latest checkpoint. Set these to none as well. I do this because I like having that control over whether or not I'm going to commit. The auto commit and auto rollback are there to, if you forget to click the button, it will do it for you and just kind of roll that forward. I like having that control and making sure that somebody goes in and clicks the button. And so we're going to ping this. And we can see that this VM is down because we forced the shutdown on it, right? And if I go to the website and I click refresh, I can't get to the website, right? Failing over, failing over. So now that those are in the commit stage, I'm going to go into data centers. I'm going to go into my ACM data center. And I can see that my two VMs are now powered on. So we're good to go there. I see that we failed over again and we're back. And I'm going to go into data center groups. And I'm going to swap the egress points back because we failed from 701 back to the ACM data center. So we failed the network points back. So again, we're able to fail over and come back very, very easily. And if I go down to Zerto, I can see that everything's waiting to commit. Our ping is back. So we got that back. That's good. And if we go to the website and hit refresh, couple spins, and our website is back up and running. So we're able to fail over and fail back. I don't have to make any changes. Everything is inside this interface, and it's just a matter of us telling it when to go do it. So that's our push button DR platform. We're trying to move from disaster recovery to IT resiliency. We want you to not think about disaster recovery as this, ooh, this is this big thing that we have to really think about. It's our ability to drive your resiliency and recovery at a much faster layer so you don't have to think about it. We're thinking about it. We're taking care of it so you can focus on things like protecting your environment from ransomware and making sure that all of your staff has phishing training so that you don't get spearphished, right? We're able to do that through the journaling. That's that ransomware protection. I can go back in time. I can find the checkpoint before we got hit, and we're able to come back up and online. We also sit down and build out those protection groups with you to build that granular recovery. So if you have this very specific application and it has a bunch of different dependencies, my database has to be up before my app server, and that has to be up before my web server, we can help you build that. And additionally, you get a VMware license savings. So our VM licensing is based on powered on VMs and gigs of RAM used. So you're not having to pay for VMware licensing as part of this. You're paying for the resources, and you can reuse those resources if you'd like to for test and dev environments because we don't oversubscribe. So those resources that you pay for are yours. They're not oversubscribed 7 customers to 1 actual gig of RAM. Everything is 1-to-1 to make sure that your resources are there. There's no first in, last out situation. So to wrap this up, DR as a service from Expedient and partner with Kraft Technology Group on the security side. We help solve those problems to help bring disaster recovery to you. Don and I are going to take some questions now. I see we have some questions in the Q&A panel. Our contact information is below. Please reach out on LinkedIn. You can reach out on email. My email address is aj.kuftic@expedient.com. So Don, I don't know if you want to give out your email address.
Yeah, it's just dbaham@craftgrp.com. I'm more frequently I'm on social media on LinkedIn, but yeah, definitely reach out via email, phone. I think our phone numbers are also on the first slide. But any way you want to reach out, Happy to take questions at this point.
Um,
Rob, do you want to look through, present any of the questions?
Sure. Okay. Sure, certainly. I'll provide them. So we've got about 11 questions, actually. So one is for Expedient to please share your data center map, if possible, in the U.S. and any global presence.
So from a global presence, those are on customer sites. So we don't have any specific location, but we're able to bring that cloud to you. So if you have a place you'd like it to be, we can try to get it there for you. Give me a second and I will pull up that map.
Hey, Rob, while AJ is doing that, is there anything else that, oh, AJ might have done it pretty quickly though. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll keep going. I'm pulling it up. I don't know why I pulled up full screen, but give me a second.
I'm looking through the questions, Rob. I see one about the losses report on the FBI. Where can I find those numbers? Yeah, so that's the if you just search the FBI IC3 report, you'll find a number of years, but you can search 2019. You'll eventually get to find it. It's on the IC3 website. Each of those years is available. I don't know how far back, but I was able to pull up 2017, 18, and 19 fairly easily.
Thank you, Don.
Yep.
AJ, how close are you?
The map is on. There it is. Right there. If I open it in PowerPoint, it takes it over. So this is just a preview of the slide. So we have data centers in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, Baltimore, Boston, Indianapolis, Memphis, and Phoenix. But we're capable of delivering it to pretty much wherever. If you have hyperscale dreams, you want to do things in AWS, Azure, GCP, we also have our cloud on-ramps to be able to connect very low latency and high-speed connections into those. So if you have you want to do things with like Azure Data Lakes or Amazon RDS or something like that. We have very low latency and very high speed connections from our data centers to there. So you can jump from us into them and not have to go build new circuits or VPN tunnels or those sorts of things.
Thank you. Here's another question. Don, I'll let you take this one. Does ransomware mostly get initiated by a bad email link?
I'm sure there are some statistics on this, but I would say it's high likelihood that ransomware is going to be delivered in some social engineering method, right? So usually phishing, sometimes a drive-by download on a particular website. I don't know. I don't have the statistics on that, but if you look at some of the industry reports that come out, ransomware is usually coupled with some sort of other threat vector like phishing.
Thank you. Another question. You mentioned, maybe AJ mentioned, that every 2 years equipment is replaced. Are you saying that Expedient refreshes its equipment every 2 years?
No. What I was referring to is more the concept of like a leased vehicle and how you're able to get the benefits of new vehicles as part of just paying for a lease, right? We're constantly refreshing our equipment. We're constantly looking at better ways to deliver resources to our customers and better resources for our customers. So as we grow, you get to grow with us. So it's not a big CapEx purchase and you got to hold on to that gear for 4 years and then reevaluate where the industry is in 4 years. You get to come along with us as we grow and as we provide better resources. So there are opportunities inside of Expedient for those resources to be provisioned.
Thank you, AJ. Any stats on internal staff threat versus external source threats for either one of you?
I'll say yes, I'm sure there are stats. I don't have those in front of me, but you know, when you look at, and I'm not sure if this is where the question was going, but there's the idea of insider threat whether they're malicious or not. Could be human error, unlike a physical piece of equipment. Could just be network admin clicking the wrong link. Potential for insiders to have a malicious intent as well. I don't know of any statistics off the top of my head, which is more common or in any particular industry. How about you, AJ?
I would say that it is a threat. I don't know that assigning a particular number to it provides any sort of true value. I think the more common one is going to be a insider threat not being done maliciously, like the Lake City. Somebody clicks the wrong link, and that link takes them to ransomware, and that ransomware runs through the network. There's definitely other hacks that have happened. I believe the Anthem hack, the big data breach that Anthem had, was done by a DBA clicking the wrong link. They used his account and then started exfiltrating data. So did he maliciously mean to click that link? No, but it happened, right? So I would say that from an insider threat, the training that needs to happen along with that, things like doing phishing training, I highly recommend just send phishing links to your people. They're not real. But doing phishing training and those sorts of things to actually get them to constantly be vigilant and constantly understand what tools that you're using. So I know that, Don, I know that you've seen our external sender bit. Whenever an email comes in, it gets marked as external. It's like, okay, I know that's coming from an external source. I should be a little bit more wary of that. Right. And then spoofing of this is this person's name, but the email address is definitely ransomware@domain.com, right? Those sorts of things, to be aware of looking at subject lines, looking at lines, making sure that links go to known good places. And that training is more important, I think, than worrying about an admin who is upset or disgruntled.
Yeah, and
both can cause the same havoc.
Yeah, 100%. On the training aspect, I think that I think one of the things that we're helping clients do is update the frequency of training. So versus I think historically it could be treated as a checkbox. Well, I've made everybody go through a once a year hour-long security awareness training that everybody forgets the next week. So building in some frequency every week, sending a 2-minute video about security, making it personal, make it something about their home security or personal security that then can translate that mindset into the enterprise environment as well. So changing up how you're training employees, I think, is important, along with what AJ has talked about, and just helping identify some of those threats as they come in.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes here. Here's a question regarding ransomware. Is it recommended that you pay the ransom or not? What happens if you pay the ransom and your data is not returned?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I think that answer is going to say it. The true answer is it depends, right? It depends on the situation, depends on what you've done ahead of time. Your only option may be to pay the ransom. And what happens after you pay the ransom? Sometimes you get your data back and sometimes you don't. Certainly the FBI is going to recommend that you don't, because it encourages bad actors. But if you don't have your data backed up in a way that is going to allow you to recover, sometimes that's your only option. I have one quick story. This was a very small business that this happened to, but they were hit with ransomware and they reached out to us for some assistance. They didn't have any backups. We kind of went back and forth. We ended up helping them pay the ransom, and the decryption key didn't work. And so kind of thought, well, maybe they're out of luck. Unfortunately for them, they were able to negotiate down to a reasonable amount of Bitcoin that wasn't going to sink the business. The decryption key didn't work though. And so they reached back out to the criminal organization, and honestly, it was great customer service. This group honestly provided fantastic customer service to get their data unencrypted. Now, I'm not proposing you pay the ransom, or that this is going to be everybody's experience, but this Middle Tennessee business was fortunate enough to reach, I guess, the right organization when they fell victim to this ransomware, and they were finally able to get their data back. So these organizations are typically run by like businesses, and they have employees in there that want to do a good job. So sometimes you get good customer service if you pay the ransom.
I think there's a level of okay, they've paid us money. Let's not make the crime any worse. Right. We want to make sure that, okay, no, we told you that if you paid us money, we'll give you the key. If the key doesn't work, then we should make sure that it works.
Right.
The WannaCry one is a fun one. There was a kill switch with a domain. Everything was trying to reach back to a domain. If it couldn't reach the domain, it kept encrypting. And somebody registered the domain was real, and everything stopped encrypting.
Nice.
So they build in these sorts of things because they have to have some control. Because if they don't, then they can potentially infect themselves.
Sure.
So there's a level of like, we want to do a good job to this, which is weird to think about. Like you think about these people who are like, they just want my money and they want me to go away. But I think they do actually want to do a good job so that they don't have to get hassled over and over again. Because more contact means more ability to get caught. And if you get caught, you're going to jail. So they want to make sure that it's, hey, we paid them, they're fine.
Okay, let's see if we can get two more questions. Do you have a preference for an operating system to use that would better secure your environment, or does an operating system really not matter?
I'd say the operating system that's not connected to the internet, that's going to be your most secure operating system. I think that, at least in my opinion, like the Mac OS as an example, it's less of a target just because it's less, it's not used as frequently. Doesn't mean it's any more secure, I don't think, but just there's less of an opportunity for bad actors to go after that population. So they tend to target Windows as an example. Linux, if you secure it right, I mean, it's definitely can be hardened a little more so than Windows out of the box. I don't know. What are your thoughts, AJ?
I think both offer the same sort of protections. In terms, Microsoft has done actually a really, really great job over the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years of making Windows Defender out of the box better. Windows Defender with ATP is actually a solid antivirus. I think they've done a really great job in terms of rolling out security updates, disabling services by default, disabling SMBv1, SMBv2. As they kind of roll forward, they recognize their position in the market. This isn't the Microsoft of 1998 where it was like, we'll put out updates whenever, I guess. They are very much forcing those sorts of things down because they recognize that they are a widely targeted operating system, especially on the end user side. So I would say that both of them require the same sorts of, the same sorts of view. I want to make sure that I'm patched. I want to make sure that my configurations are as hardened as they can be. Follow the various security benchmarks that exist. There's CIS. If you want to go down the hardest line of all, go down the DISA STIG path. The STIGs are actually really great because they're black and white. This service is on or this service is off. There's no like sort of turn off services that don't need to be there. So there's very little gray area in there. So there's the number of those sorts of security benchmarks, but those apply to either operating system. Make sure you're patched, manage your config, follow a good benchmark, and generally you should be okay because there's other pieces to that puzzle. It's not just the operating system. It's how am I managing my firewalling? How am I managing my network flow once they're inside of the network? Am I managing file protection? So am I looking at my file servers to make sure that there's not malicious files just sitting on our file servers? There's a number of layers to the security onion that need to be verified. So it's not just this operating system is better than this operating system. It's a very fun discussion to have, but it's not necessarily the whole discussion.
I would echo the patching statement there. I think that's one of the things that we see a big gap still is organizations have a hard time getting their arms wrapped around a successful patching program. And without that, it really doesn't matter what operating system you put in. If you're not doing the patching properly, you're not doing vulnerability management, you're going to continue to find holes that are poked in the environment. So that's extremely important.
Hey, Rob, do you want to announce the winners of the prizes?
Yeah, I've got one more question. How about we try that in 2 or 3 minutes? Lastly, how many checkpoints can you go back to from a history standpoint? I'm assuming replication here. How many checkpoints can you go back to?
Depends. It depends on the amount of disk space that we're using for journaling. You can set policies to allow a certain amount of recovery points, and maybe you want to do longer journals for database VPGs than you do for an app server, right? Or a web server or something like that. And you can get that granular. That's one of the benefits of our the VPG platform, to be able to have, or the Zerto platform, the ability to have those individual granular sorts of the protection groups, so that you don't have to worry about, I have to set this policy for all of them. I can set it for just a couple of them. So I would say that it depends, sadly. I wish I had a better answer than that, but it really depends on the amount of on the policy and what you set them to.
Okay, thank you, AJ. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our webinar, and so what we have now is the prize giveaway. Thank you, Don, and thank you, AJ, very much. Regarding the prizes, before the webinar, I chose random numbers, and as the questions came in, right, whoever landed on those 2 random numbers are the winners. And what I have is for the winner of the Expedient Sonos Smart Speaker is Ralph Culver. Ralph Culver is the winner of the Expedient Sonos Smart Speaker. And the second number I had was Doug Sider. Doug Sider wins the Kraft Technology Group $150 Amex gift card. So there's our 2 winners.
Excellent.
Awesome. Congratulations to both of you guys.
Congrats, Doug.
I think this is a really great webinar. I hope you guys learned things. Don, thank you for coming on with us and talking about security. I think this is a super interesting topic, especially for pairing it with something like disaster recovery. Absolutely.
It's number one way you can protect yourself against ransomware is having an effective DR strategy and service in place. So it was a pleasure doing this webinar, and I look forward to connecting with anyone else that has any questions coming out of this.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Don. Thanks. Thank you, AJ. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.